Hi everyone, this is Milan, and in this tutorial I'm going to deal with Photoshop layers. Now, layers are the most essential part of Photoshop. It's the heart of it. It's the backbone of Photoshop. It's where everything exists. People tend to be scared of layers and try and avoid layers, but at the end of the day, like I always tell people, even if you understand what every tool does, but you don't understand layers and you're not comfortable with layers, then you do not understand Photoshop. It is absolutely essential that you grasp this side of it, and I'm going to try and explain it in a way that is easy and very straightforward. And I'm not going to use photos for this example for a very specific reason, in that being that the moment you're viewing a photo, people tend to want to they think about what they want to change on the photo, what they want to edit, and this is simply for you to grasp layers and just its functionality and how it operates. Alright, so what I'm going to do is just use blank layers and fill it with content, and then we'll use that for this example. So we've got the layers palette here. If you can't see the layers palette, if I hide this, you just open the window drop down, and halfway down you'll see it says layers, and the shortcut is F7. So if I just press F7, then my layers palette pops up. If yours is docked inside here, you can simply just click it and drag it out, and that is the way that you view it to look this way. Alright, at the bottom of each palette, it has certain buttons that has to do with that palette specific. If I start on the right here, you'll see that we've got a little grayed out dustbin. Now what the dustbin does is it deletes the layer. Now, since nothing can exist without a layer in Photoshop, and we simply have a single layer, Photoshop is not allowing us to delete that layer. If I come to the button next to it and hover the mouse over it, it's going to tell me this creates a new layer. If I click it, now I can actually delete that layer again. By simply pressing on the little dustbin, I've deleted the layer. I'm going to press on the new layer icon, and you'll see that it creates a new layer above the one that I previously had selected. If I select the bottom layer and now go create a new layer, it's going to select or create a layer in between those two because I had the bottom layer selected. Alright, so it's just an important principle to note. What I'm going to do is just select a layer. It doesn't have to be the top one, it can be anyone. And then in my color picker, I'm just going to click on it and just get a nice bright color. So in this case, a red. I'm going to click on my brush, click within the canvas area, and just make my brush size a bit bigger. Make sure that the hardness is set somewhere between 80 and 90, and then just click to get a nice solid circle. Alright, select a new layer, get a different color, in this case blue, and just click it so that they overlap. Get a nice green. Same thing. Alright, so these three are lying on top of each other, and I can see that in the layers palette, that the green is on top, the blue is at the bottom, and I can see that reflected in the canvas. It's as if we're standing on top looking down, so we can see the top is green, red, and at the bottom blue. Now I can change the order of these. So let's say I select the bottom layer and I click and drag it in between the other two. You'll see that it makes this thick line, which tells me that it's going to put that layer in between them. If I let go of the mouse, the blue layer jumps in between the red and the green. I can take the bottom layer and then click and drag it up, and now the red layer is on top. Alright, so it's very easy to change the layering order around. Alright, what you saw happening there was that I simply clicked on the wrong area, and Photoshop is very sensitive to where you click. If you click on the name itself, then we can rename this layer, but when you click in this open area, a very different thing happens. Alright, but we'll get to layer styles in a second. Just to note that on the left of the layer there's a little eye icon. Now what this does is if you click on it, it hides the visibility of that layer. In this case, the layer seems like it disappeared, but it's only not visible to us. So I can see in my layers palette here that we still have the layer there. I can even move that layer. So let's say I take the move tool and I move it down. I can see now that the blue circle has moved down, and if I bring the visibility back up, then I can see that. Alright, so this is simply to illustrate that it's a way for Photoshop just to temporarily hide that layer from being visible. Alright, let's say I only wanted to hide a certain percentage of it. So let's say we wanted to see 50% of this layer. That is when I come to the opacity on top here. Now, It's at the moment set to 100%, and it's got this little arrow at the side here that I can click, and it gives me a drop down slider which I can then click and drag, and now I've set it to 95% opacity. Alright, I can also click within that area and manually type it. So let's say 50 or 40. And now I'm only viewing 40% of my layer. And what's nice about this is not dependent on history. I can go on working for a couple of hours and at any point come back and just put the visibility back up to 100%. I can also put the mouse over the name opacity, and it makes a little hand with a little arrow. This means that I can now click and just pull my mouse to the left or the right, anywhere in my document, as long as I'm holding down. And now I can update the opacity of the layer as well. The moment I let go, I have to come back to the name itself. Alright, and this is the way that I prefer to work, just because it's quick and easy. So just to set it down or bring it back up. Alright, now below that we have what is called fill. Now at the moment fill, if I drop this down, it seems like it's doing exactly the same thing. It's taking the entire layer away and it's bringing the entire layer back. But what fill does essentially is it's focusing on the actual pixels that are filling the layer. So to illustrate this, if we come to the bottom of the layers palette, on the far left, the second icon from the left, it says FX. If you click on it, it gives us a little drop down that says bevel and emboss, drop shadow. It gives us all those nice effects that we can apply to the layer. Now I like to use the quickest, easiest way to access anything in Photoshop, and there's always 2 or 3 ways to do anything. So I'm going to double click in that area as you saw me doing earlier. Double click, and this gives us the layer styles option box. Alright, so now I can click, for instance, on bevel and emboss, and now I can start editing it. So in this case we're adding a nice bevel, changing the size, we're changing the softness, and let's say we wanted to add a drop shadow. Now if I click on this little block, you can see that I've added a drop shadow. If I untick it, you'll see that it goes away, but I'm still seeing the settings for bevel and emboss. So this is important to note, because sometimes what people do is they'll switch something on and then they go and change the settings and don't realize that they're still editing the settings of the previous style that they've applied. So you have to click on the name itself to actually get the settings for it. So with drop shadow selected, I can now go and change the actual size of it or the distance, alright, the opacity, and so forth. Okay, the moment I click OK, you'll see what happens is that Photoshop tells me that on this layer there are layer styles applied to it. Alright, in this case I can see the effects is a bevel and emboss, and there's also a drop shadow. I can now individually switch these on or off, or I can switch all the effects off. At the right here I've got a little FX icon, which means that I can collapse this layer or the visibility of the effects just to give me a bit more screen space. If you're working with 50 or 100 layers, then this becomes quite essential. Alright, and at any point I can just double click on the name and it'll bring me right back to the settings. Okay, then another thing, just very quickly, is blending modes. Now on the left of opacity here, you'll see that it says normal and it's got little up and down arrows. If I click on this, I get this long drop down of different blending modes that I can use. So let's say I take the very top layer, which is the blue one, and I select it to a multiply. You'll see now that as this layer overlaps with layers below it, it's giving me a different color. So it's the way that this layer is blending with what's below it. Let's say I change it to a lighten. You'll see that now I'm getting a completely different effect. Now it's kind of pointless to try and learn what all these does. There are a few that does very specific things, and I'll show you an example of that. If I'm going to just take a new document, drag it down, and I'm just going to drag this text into the previous layer, the previous document. Alright, so now I've got this document and I've got text that is being on its own layer, just overlaid on the top layer over the rest of my document. Let's just temporarily hide that, and I'm going to create a new layer, just drag it below that. Let's drag it to the bottom and fill it with a color. So I'm going to select a different color, let's say lightish greenish color. Get the paint bucket on the bottom layer, just drop the paint bucket, and now it's filled that layer with color. Okay, so now if I come back to this text layer, you'll see that now it's basically obscuring the rest of the image. But now if I set this to a blending mode of multiply, you'll see that it's actually removing all the white, allowing me to have the text floating above the rest of the document. So this is really handy if you have a document with a white background, and without trying to remove all the white, you simply set it to a blending mode of multiply. Alright, the same thing will happen, or the inverse will happen if you set it to screen. So this is basically giving us the inverse effect. Alright, so now you'll see everything that is black has become see-through, and the white is obscuring the rest. Alright, and this is simply by using different blending modes. Okay, so a very, very powerful tool, and the best way to learn these is simply just to play around with it and just to see what the different results will be. Alright, so I'm going to delete that layer, delete the bottom one, and we're back to where we started. Alright, and then just lastly, what I want to show is, if you come to the bottom of the layers palette here, we have what is called different fill or adjustment layers. Alright, now in Photoshop CS5, actually I think it's from CS4 up to 6, they've created a whole new adjustments panel, alright, with adjustments that I can dock at the bottom here. So you'll see we have things like brightness, contrast, levels, color balance, hue, saturation. Before CS4, we had to use this little drop down here. So if I click on it, you'll see I get the same things. I get levels, curves, exposure, vibrance. Alright, similar than what these icons represent. Now how this works, again, Photoshop is going to create a layer above the one we have previously selected. So let's say if we, for instance, get a hue saturation. What it does is it's going to throw an adjustment layer above the other layers, and now I can edit that layer, and it's forcing its effect down onto the rest of the layers below it. Okay, and that's basically essentially what's happening here. So I've made everything black and white, and I can bring the color back up again. Let's say that layer was only above the bottom layer. If I make it black and white now, it will only be that one layer that will be affected, since it is affecting everything that is below it. So let's bring it back to the top. Let's say I wanted to only affect the layer that's right below that. So in the properties here, where I can change it, you'll see that on the left there's a little icon here that basically it says that it's going to clip to the layer below. So if I click on that, you'll see that now it affects only the layer that's directly below it. And if I move it down, it's going to affect the two layers below it until I clip it, and now it's affecting only the layer directly below it. Alright, and this is just fill or adjustment layers. It's really, really powerful. And if I switch this back up, for instance, we can change the color completely, and let's just make a new adjustment. So we can make a color balance on top of that, and now add more red or add more blue. And the benefit of using adjustment layers is that at any point I can, if I feel that the effect is too much, I can just drop the opacity, or I can simply hide the layer completely. If I want to delete the layer completely, if I come to the bottom here, you'll see that this layer comes with what is called the layer mask. If I delete it here, it's first going to want to delete the layer mask and then the layer. If I want to get rid of the entire adjustment layer, I have to come to the properties and delete it from here, and it's going to delete that entire adjustment layer. Alright, and that in a nutshell is just layers. So we have the little dustbin, new layers, adjustment layers, we've got the effects and blending modes, how these layers affect each other in terms of opacity and fill. So it's a lot to digest, it's a lot going on. The best advice that I can give is pretty much to create a document like this and create a couple of layers, add circles to it with different colors, and just start fooling around with it. Just see how these layers interact with each other. Start moving the layering order around, start dropping the opacity of it, start changing the fill of it, and see how this is actually affecting the layers itself till you get comfortable with it. And then once you're comfortable with it, working with an image with different layers becomes a lot more simple. Alright, so in a nutshell, that's layers. I hope it wasn't too complicated, and give it a crack, play around with it, and get on top of it and start doing some awesome stuff. Alright, that's it. Cheers.